I've often spoken about how the Pahlavists, up to the leader himself, are far right, racist, Islamophobic, anti Arab, traffic in conspiracy theories, fascistic, etc. And people say, hey, Muhammad, you can't judge a movement by some of its worst followers. Well, over the last few weeks, I've shown you that it seems like it's the majority of the followers. And then they'll say, well, Muhammad, you should judge the movement by its leader. Hear what he has to say. Look, he's very nice and liberal. He says all the right things. Well, occasionally he lets the mask slip. It's true that he says all the right things to the right audiences. He's a politician after all. But sometimes he lets his true mindset out. So I was surprised to see that even for him, I was surprised that he went on Visegrad 24, which is just a far right slop garbage channel. Although I should say I'm not surprised even for him because he did allow himself to be interviewed by Adolf from Germany. I posted about it. YouTube censored it, unfortunately. But nonetheless, Visegrad is a far-right slop conspiracy theory channel. You have Imam of Peace. These people are all infamous. If you don't know who they are, look them up. They're just all propagandists. Reza Pahlavi. Remigration is the only solution. This guy, he's a Zionist Speaker's Corner. It seems like he's now fled, so maybe he's no longer plaguing Speaker's Corner. We have Apostate Prophet. God, Tommy Robinson. I mean, just a motley crew of the worst Islam haters, the most shameless haters of Islam and Muslims. Not talking about fair criticism of an ideology here. I mean just pure kind of Dare Stormer type of hatred against Muslims as a people. If you go on the Wikipedia page, it notes that they're linked with far-right Polish parties. I'm not going to go into a deep dive of who these people are because it's important what Reza Pahlavi said on their platform. It's just worth looking into them. Here's their website. The first thing is Reza Pahlavi, huge. If you go on their Instagram, again, just more of this far-right slop content. We know exactly what type of people they are. And I've beefed with their Twitter before, if I remember correctly. You could just scroll through this feed and see, again, more of this garbage. But let's see what Reza June had to tell them. Again, he knows his audience. He knows who he's talking to. So let's see what he tells them.
That level of extremism, of radical Islam, is beginning to be felt in Europe. And I warned the Europeans many, many years ago that it would eventually end in your own backyard. I remember a conversation I had with a member of the House of Lords in the early 80s. And I said, the way Europe looks at the Middle East is like a far distant area. It doesn't affect us. We're fighting each other over there. And I remember telling him, this is probably 1982, that one of these days it's going to be in your own backyard. And guess what? It is not in your own backyard. And unfortunately, there's a certain angle of thinking here, mostly the leftists. The minute you say that, it's, oh, you're Islamophobic. Do you think that people in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or in Iran, when they talk about...
I love this. So first of all, notice how he says leftists. When I say it's a far-right movement, he's positioning himself as the opposite spectrum of leftists with respect to the issue of Muslims in Europe. And we know very well that leftists, for all the problems that any political movement may have, they're pretty good about being accommodating to outsiders, having this idea of, okay, we're an open society, you can come and assimilate and we can build a better future with different types of people. And I think most reasonable people in the world have some degree of a left-wing view with respect to assimilation, immigration, getting along, building the future, a humanity where we're not all locked into little countries, but we can all live together. What's the reason that all of us love cities like New York? Why do I love living here? Because New York exemplifies that type of thing, right? Same with ancient Rome. We always talk about, oh, Rome was so diverse. Of course, diversity has its issues. I'm not here to sugarcoat that. And I've often been a critic of Muslim excesses in the West, Muslims who do all kinds of ridiculous things to agitate the host society. So I'm not some sort of propagandist here in the other direction. But you see how he positions himself with the far right with respect to Europe. He says, I was warning you that it's going to come here. And then he says, do you think you know better than Saudi Arabia and the UAE? Now, notice he's positioning himself with the far-right authoritarian Gulf oil dictatorships that are hardcore, no free speech, anti-Islam, secular dictatorship type of vibe. So, of course, Saudi Arabia is completely different than UAE, but they both have this very adversarial relationship with their own populations in a way. Again, he views himself being in communion with those secular autocrat Middle East oil dictatorship. So when I say that he really wants to be the king of Iran, he's not just going to be some transitional figure. This is what I'm talking about. And he's said things in Persian to that effect, by the way. Again, the mask slips occasionally. So notice where he places himself. He's not with the liberals or even leftists in Europe. Now, when he talks to those people, he says, we have the principles of the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So you think, oh, okay, he's like a center-left kind of Democrat, for American context type of person. But then when he sits with the far right, his real bedfellows, he says, the stupid European leftists, they're too nice to Muslims. We need to be like Mohammed bin Salman, Mr. Bonesaw, and the guys in the UAE who will throw you in a dungeon if you're Uyghur and ship you back to China. We need to be like those guys. Let's hear more of what he has to say.
Radical Islam, they are Islamophobic, they are Muslims. Can't you tell the difference?
They're Islamophobic? Question. No, they're Muslims. Oh, yeah, actually, they're Islamophobic. If you are the leader of an authoritarian state that curtails the practice of religion, and we're not talking about preventing, radical imams from inciting crowds. I'm talking about stuff that is legal in America, the country that he and I both live in. Now, I don't really view him as an American, not because he doesn't have the citizenship he does, but because he doesn't believe in the values of this country, it seems. For example, not having a monarchy. We were founded by not having a monarchy. Also, freedom of religion. So we're not talking about, crazy Muslims are being curtailed. I think everyone can agree if you're going to disrupt the society in some major way, maybe your life should be bothered. But we're talking about really basic religiosity. We're talking about in these Arab states where if you go to morning prayer at the mosque too many times, you end up in a dungeon. You hear stories of Muslims who lived in these Arab secular tyrannical societies. They would carry alcohol in their car in case they got pulled over because they have a beard and they look religious. They want to have subterfuge and appear to be irreligious, famously, for example, in Tunisia. So this is who he views himself as being ideologically aligned with. The far-right dictatorships, the just crazy dictatorships, the worst violators of human rights in the Middle East. He's holding them up as his example. It's just incredible.
There's a certain angle of thinking here, mostly the leftists. The minute you say that, it's, oh, you're Islamophobic. Do you think that people in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE or in Iran, when they talk about radical Islam, they are Islamophobic? They're Muslims. Can't you tell the difference? And when you call something for what it is, you've been accused of painting them the wrong way. That's the kind of hypocrisy and double standard that exists. But the reality is that, yes, the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamic regime are fomenting extremism, radicalism, hatred, bigotry, and discrimination. That's the essence of their ideology. What we want as Iranians is a country where we can guarantee every single citizen of Iran, irrespective of their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, or political affiliation, justice and equality under the law.
Now, I should say, just because I'm responding to him doesn't mean I disagree with literally everything he says. What he said there, I agree with. I think most Iranians, even most religious Iranians, agree. We should probably head towards a direction where there's less legal discrimination against people. I, as a practicing Muslim, don't see any issue with that. I don't need the state to force people to follow my religion. I'm happy to just follow it on my own and among the other people who want to follow it. And I think that if we just allow people to be free, like some Arab countries, that most people gravitate towards kind of a more traditional life in the Middle East. So having said that, we'll move on.
And to any form of discrimination that this regime has been the root cause of. And it's not just us being affected, it's affecting many others around the world. That is not the direction to go. And it is, for us, when we look at the West, what do we look at the West for? We're not looking to Beijing, we're not looking to, we're looking to the West. Why? Because these are the established democracies where we assume these liberties and these values are in fact cherished and protected. But why is it that when it comes to countries like ours, all of a sudden, it's no longer a question of human rights, it's a question of, well, maybe they think differently, maybe we should try to understand them. This is what they were saying at the beginning. Let's try to understand them. They may be different, we have to be able to believe in that. I'm sorry, but bigotry is bigotry. Radicalism is radicalism. You cannot discriminate discrimination.
It's the Karl Popper paradox, the tolerance of the intolerant. One of the things that really marked me over the last few months was seeing a poster of the Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah, held by a leftist and a kafir at a demonstration in London, and the poster that she had said, "Be on the right side of history." What stage have we reached if we've got these radicals who side with the Islamic regime over and above the protesters that are being massacred? How do you feel about what some people are describing as the Islamization of the West? There has been wave after wave of mass migration. Many of those have come from majority Muslim countries. Do you think that warning that you issued to that lord in the 1980s, is that coming true in terms of demographic replacement as well? Is this something that concerns you, of sort of losing them as ideological allies? Is this something that you're concerned with?
Well, so one issue with this is they portray the support for Iran's former supreme leader as an Islamist thing, when if you live in a Western society, the majority of dictator worship is actually done by white leftists or just native leftists. The number of Muslims who supported Iran's supreme leader is vanishingly small. So I think the vast majority of Sunnis probably are at some level of disagreement with him. Maybe now because he was assassinated, they voice support. But a year ago, I think most Sunnis in the world are like, Iran's supreme leader, not so great. And a lot of Shias don't like him, especially ones that end up here. So the number of people who support this guy earnestly because of religiosity as a Muslim is actually vanishingly small in the West. Most people who support him are just leftist, tanky types who are interested for aura reasons or for anti-West reasons in boosting all these global South strongmen like Assad, like Gaddafi, like Saddam. We're used to this stuff. Case in point, there was a vigil for Khamenei in New York City, not hosted by the Imam Ali Islamic Center, which the Iranian government built, if I'm not mistaken, or the Al-Khoui Islamic Center, which is another Shia one. Not any Islamic center, not any Shia center. It was hosted by Brooklyn-based, I'm pretty sure, leftists, kind of like a far left group. That's the norm, really. The majority of people I've met in America who hear I'm Iranian say, oh, I love Khamenei, or whoever the supreme leader is now. Well, it's Khamenei again, so they would say the same name. They're white leftist tanky types. I've met my fair share of them. They're pretty rare. So this idea that there's people chanting with, right side of history with Khamenei on it in the West is not a real thing. It's just not real.
I would hate to see a scenario whereby we will settle for things have to get worse before they start getting better. In that light, let's say, for instance, that you are one of these Western countries. I will use one example specifically only because there's a reason I'm bringing this up. Belgium, let's say. So I know this gentleman who actually wrote a book about Iran, who is doing some research as well as some teaching, and he was telling me that my apartment is 1 mile away from the royal palace in Brussels. Yet in my own district, there are some Islamists that are pushing legislation to conduct not only the Sharia law, but to segregate buses, so women and men ride in separate buses in Brussels.
Okay, so this is a joke. This might be one of those things that an Iranian uncle just says. Who knows? Maybe there were a couple nut jobs in Brussels. I know that there are some ghettoizations in Europe where Muslims have had trouble integrating, and I've criticized that before, sure enough. But again, this is just feeding this conspiracy nonsense. The majority of Muslims are not interested in stuff like this. Most of us don't even come from countries where the buses are segregated. I think the only one I've been to where that's the case is Iran. Maybe Saudi Arabia or Yemen has something similar, but you look at most Muslims in the West, they're coming from Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, not countries where there's any sort of serious gender segregation outside of volunteer spaces like a mosque. You enter a mosque voluntarily that's gender segregated, like synagogues, for example. I've been to synagogues in America where they are gender segregated, but that's a volunteer association. And by the way, if you want to look at actual kind of, let's say, structural gender segregation that's just tolerated, you find it in Orthodox Jewish communities like the ones I've been to. But because they are kind of more protected, there's a greater taboo. Unfortunately, it's going away. And I say unfortunately, maybe some Muslims will get annoyed because I don't believe in bigotry of any kind. I do believe in humanism and brotherly love to everyone. So I would extend that dignity to them, that if they want to use their freedom of association to have a particular religious worldview, they should have it. But it's okay for them to do it and no one really cares. But when Muslims want to do it, which we don't really do it that often anyway, it's not that common. Most Muslim communities in the West that I've run into are kind of moderate, especially in North America, where he lives, so surely he should know that. All of a sudden, some big issue. And I don't even think this is real. I would like for someone to point it out that in Belgium, there was some push to segregate. You always hear these stories of, oh, they want to establish Sharia, they want to do this, they want to do that, but it never ends up being real. It's always just a couple nut jobs, a couple kooky guys. I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan. They always talk about, not literally in the vicinity, kind of speaking broadly here. Someone will say, oh, he grew up in this area in the vicinity. I went to school there. And I never met anyone who in earnest was interested in changing the civil law of America to match Islamic ethics. It's not a thing. They want it to be a thing so bad. And it's so painful for me to just tell them, it's just really not. It's not popular. Look at Pew polling of American Muslims. Support for amending American law to have the Sharia is just vanishing. Even in the most kind of conservative European Muslim countries, the support is not at a level where it's possible to change anything. And there's another issue that in Europe, the law is structurally set so that that stuff isn't possible anyway. So for example, in America, we have more freedom. You can homeschool your kids. So there's kind of conservative Muslims who will withdraw their kids from school, like Amish, like Orthodox Jews, they'll have their own way. But you can't even do that in Europe. I think in every European country I've heard of, homeschooling is illegal. Or in America, you have a greater scope for voluntary association. So for example, there is a women's only cafe in the Bronx in a Yemeni neighborhood. Technically, it might be illegal. There's some women-only salons, too, for Muslims, but people just kind of let it go, basically. I don't even think that's allowed in Europe. So this idea that Europe is going to flip to some Sharia, gender-segregated world that you don't even really find in Muslim countries, it's just a joke to me. I mean, sure, maybe if like 80% of people in a country in Europe are Muslim, that might happen. But in the countries where they are 80% Muslim, that's not currently happening. So it's just, again, it's just more fear-mongering, conspiratizing. And he lives in America where this is just not the case.
Now I ask you as a European, have we come to a point where this country says not only you can come to a country as a guest, and instead of assimilating and respecting our values and our culture, you're dictating to us that we should now practice the Sharia law in Europe and incorporate it into the system? If that's the way Europe wants to end up like, then honestly, I'm lost for words.
Again, this is just not serious. This is not happening in any serious way. I remember 10, 15 years ago, there were those Sharia for UK people putting up stickers saying this is a Sharia zone. This stuff is not serious. There's big Muslim communities in Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx, Harlem, where I live, in Philly, Dearborn, Chicago. I've been to all these places giving lectures. I have never encountered anything like Sharia patrols. I've never seen any serious desire to enforce religiosity. But you know where you find it? Again, Orthodox Jewish communities here in New York. You go, they have Hatzalah. Now, Hatzalah doesn't patrol religiosity, to be fair to them, but they are like a Jewish police force, basically, that operate in tandem, in effect, with the NYPD. Now, they don't have jurisdiction over them or really over anyone, but again, you see actual examples of parallel societies and gender segregation and posters saying this is a modest neighborhood, yelling at women who aren't dressed modestly, which is a very common experience you can hear, especially from the older school, people who lived in that type of area. And he wouldn't say anything, of course, because he doesn't want to upset Benjamin Netanyahu, his best buddy, right, who's bombing his country, so that he can be placed on a throne of rubble there. But he has these imaginary things about Muslims. So there aren't Muslim police forces, there aren't Sharia courts, there aren't any of those things, but they do exist in reality for people like Amish people or Orthodox Jews, and they have nothing to say. So if they were being consistent, they would apply the criticisms equally, right? See, I'm consistent in my humanism and my love of freedom. I say have at it. Have your Amish purpose-built community, have your Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. I'll go eat a Reuben sandwich there and chop it up on that Abrahamic brotherhood thing or whatever I've done before in Brooklyn many times. Have at it. But then give Muslims the same freedom to associate freely as well. How come when they do it, it's not a conspiracy, but when we do it, it's some takeover conspiracy? Why is it that if you were to say Orthodox Jews taking over a neighborhood, again, legally via free association, if you say it's a plot to take over the world, that would be correctly called anti-Semitic. But if you say that about Muslims, it's just normal discourse. And now, mind you, the guy he's interviewing who believes this stuff is just some white Polish guy. I think maybe he's the Polish guy here. I think it was a Pole and some South African running this. He's just some white European far-right person. Okay, fair enough. Think that. But you, Reza, you're the, in theory, I don't know if he is anymore, Muslim king or wannabe king, pretender to a throne of a Muslim country. So you trafficking in this dialogue openly is very different than the host of this channel.
If that's where we have to get to that point. What I'm telling you is that Iranians, and I know many other countries in the region, are desperate to liberate themselves from this extremism, from this radicalism. That nothing good came out of this so-called Sharia law. Because in the name of Sharia law, the first thing that Khomeini did was to undo what the previous regime had brought in terms of equality of women and their rights with the family law plan. That was the first thing that they abolished. And then everything took a downturn. This is the consequence of a regime that was advocating Sharia law. We know how disastrous it's been. Just look at Iran and the state of affairs there. And now you think that's a good example to follow for Europeans? Because they'll end up like Iran pretty soon.
Okay, I don't disagree with this, Philly. He's making a good point. The way the government has gone has not had good results, and it's turned a lot of people off of Islam. See, I'm always fair. Criticize what you disagree with and give credit where it's due, or just say, yeah, that's not wrong. I don't think that, I mean, maybe some Iranians will be mad at me, but the government did not manage its attitude to Islam well. And that's why part of the reason why we're at the impasse we're at.
The writing is on the wall. And all you need to do is to ask the people who have actually endured it to tell you what it actually means. I don't want the Europeans to end up being where Iranians are today only to discover what it actually means. I'm just trying to save you time. But if you insist on that, so be it. But
so this is a myth that they pander to far-right people. It's just never going to happen because of demographic differences, assimilation trends, etc. So there aren't nearly enough Muslims, even in the most Muslim-dense cities. There's just not enough to create that type of change. And Muslims are not, all united in their senses of religiosity. We can never get along on anything, right? So if you have even a city like Malmo, I think they're half Muslim there. How many are Shia? How many are Salafi? How many are Sufi? How many are just secular people from the Muslim world who are particularly passionate? Maybe they're just Muslim a little bit. And then you consider even if, okay, there's waves of immigration and the birth rates, all this stuff, right? Like the shooter of the Christchurch mosque said, it's about the birth rates. Well, they're not coming at a rate at which they can reach the critical mass of ideologically convinced people at a rate that exceeds the pace of assimilation, I should say. So they're getting assimilated as more people are coming. And the other thing is you can just shut off the immigration. You have the reins. Like you could just stop bringing people if there's too many of one group without going as far as engaging in this type of propaganda, this type of discourse. It just normalizes violence and eventually genocide. I don't want to say the first letter because then I'm going to get demonetized again from YouTube. You're going to end up there with this type of rhetoric, honestly. I hate to say it, but Europe is no stranger.
then you have only yourselves to blame.
Reza, as we come to the end of this interview, we've talked a lot about facts. But you are an Iranian. You're the son of the Shah. You're the Crown Prince. You're one of the main figures of the Iranian opposition. What do you feel when you see these images coming out of your home country? How does it feel to be in exile away from your people as they face this great tragedy?
Well,
So here we have it. I think he's switching topics now. He let his mask slip a little. No, it's not egregious. He didn't come out and say, deport them all, destroy them. Maybe like this guy on the other side would agree. But you can tell from his attitude, the way he talks about great replacement, there's going to be more Muslims than non-Muslims. They're going to have Sharia law. You get a sense for his attitude towards Islam, which again would be fine if he was just some random right-wing uncle. But he's a guy who wants to be the king of a majority Muslim country with tens of millions of Sunnis, by the way, possibly. So maybe the secular Shias would say, oh, we kind of agree. We're sick of the government. The Sunni religious people, the Baloch, the Arabs, the Kurds, they're not on this wavelength. So you need to know that he might get on the stage and say, liberté, fraternité, égalité, the anthem of the French Revolution. He likes to style himself as a francophone French speaker. But in his heart of hearts, he has a lot of hatred and resentment towards Islam and Muslims. So if you're a Muslim abroad watching this and you were wondering what the Pahlavis think of you, especially if you're a European Muslim living in the UK, Northern Europe, whatever, been in those communities, a lot of lovely people there, wish to visit again. In fact, I would have visited again for events in Ramadan if it wasn't for this terrible situation. If you're wondering what he thinks about you, this is what he thinks. And if you're wondering what Iran will look like, he claims that Iran will be an open country. He went on Kalama TV, which is a Salafi-leaning, I think Gulf-based or London-based TV channel for Iranian Sunni exiles. And they have fair grievances totally. But for some reason, they support this guy, even though he's very clearly anti-Islam, if he can even be called a Muslim. So they're supporting like effectively like an agnostic person to rule a Muslim country. It just makes no sense. But he told them, oh, no, there's going to be freedom for Sunnis. There's going to be a Sunni mosque in Tehran and a Sunni mosque in every city. It's just like full freedom. But then when he talks to people who don't like Islam, so that's to Muslims, but when he talks to people who don't like Islam, he's praising MBS in the UAE model of dealing with Muslims. Look, Iranians can vote for who they want. They can choose what they want. Certainly, the Islamic government we currently have has not managed the country well. So they have a right to be upset and they have a right to change their government. I'm an American and I believe that. But if you're a Muslim Iranian or if you're a non-Iranian Muslim and you're wondering what to think about this issue, you should know that he thinks this about you. Forget what he said. The fact that he accepted an interview from this platform. I have the policy of accepting interviews. If you see me, I've accepted interviews from leftists, rightists, centrists, pro-Iranian government, anti-Iranian government, Arab, non-Arab. I accept everyone. I want the platform. I want to get the anti-war message out. I'm a smaller guy. I've always said I don't agree with people who interview me. Sometimes, even in the interview, I say that. I can kind of say, all right, I need the platform right now. But this guy, he has millions of followers unto himself. And he could just get on any platform. He could hit up the New York Times and say, I want to write an op-ed, and I'm sure they would print it. He has no problem. He can fund his own media empire. I think he had $50 million in the 70s. He appears on this page with 170K, and he gets 75K views. It's not like he's desperate. It's not like it's the only platform that was willing to host him. He did it because he wanted to, because he agrees with them. He thinks similar to them. He's a fellow traveler. He's a bedfellow. So that revealed a lot. It wasn't like he's this little creator and he's just desperate for airtime. Like if these guys wanted to interview me, I'd probably just go tell them, hey, I disagree with you, but thanks for bringing me on. I'm trying to get my message out. But really, you really need to do this. The fact that he did it alone is just just kind of brings him down in my estimation. As Arabs say, which I'm sure he's not fond of the Arabs, he fell for my eye. As cheshmam uftad, we say it as well. Anyway, this is not usually what I do. I don't do video reactions. If you like it, let me know. Maybe I'll do more. I'm going to start streaming soon, hopefully. If you want to hop on a format where it looks like this, where my video's in the corner and we're working on stuff on the screen, I have Persian classes, both teaching the language and the poetry, as well as many other goodies in the bio, so you should go check them out. And if you want to see short form content, check me out on all the other platforms. You see that stuff, TikTok, Instagram. And if you want to see my bantering, go to Twitter. That's all below. Until next time, I hope you have a nice day. And if you have family in Iran, I hope they're safe. Khodafez, everyone.